Have you ever felt forgotten? Ever been faithful, prayed every day, and still nothing changed? It may have even gotten worse. Joseph knew this feeling. Joseph had every reason to believe his history was over. He had been betrayed, enslaved, falsely accused, and forgotten. Today we'll see how God was setting the stage for a miracle only God could orchestrate. Today on Refining Grace, where we study the Word of God to become refined, strengthened, and full of God's grace. Joseph had been falsely accused and now found himself in prison. He had resisted the temptation. He even removed himself from the temptation, but he was still in prison. When hell can't get us to fall for the temptation, when they can't get the actual proof, hell will create a lie. Joseph went to prison for a crime he didn't do. This would seem like the end of the story, but God's favor was still on Joseph. In the end of Genesis 39, we see that Joseph was still faithful. And because of this faithfulness, he was placed in charge of the prisoners. Somehow Joseph found a way to show the love of God in prison, in a dungeon. His life seemed to be falling apart, but he stood in the strength of God. Joseph was able to touch lives wherever he was. Joseph didn't let circumstances define his service for God. And because of this, God used Joseph where he was. And as long as you are faithful, God will use you where you are. In Genesis 40, we see where Joseph ministered to those in need. Joseph looked to his God instead of where he was. He knew he had the strength to endure because of his God. Joseph, a lowly slave, was placed in a part of the prison where it was the house of the captain of the guard. He was no longer in the bottom of the dungeon. Joseph was in charge of everything that the prisoners did. He was given authority in the prison. The slave went to authority. It says that the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that Joseph did. This prisoner, this slave, had so much trust that they didn't check into what he was doing. They knew that he was doing what needed to be done. That is the favor of God. One day, two new prisoners came in. They were not just any prisoners. They were brought to the same place that Joseph was. These men were Pharaoh's baker and cupbearer, the men responsible for keeping Pharaoh safe. The two most trusted men of Pharaoh. The baker was trusted because he was responsible for not only making good food for Pharaoh to eat, but he was responsible for making sure that food was not poisoned. The cupbearer was responsible for testing everything that Pharaoh drank and making sure that it did not have poison. Something happened, and Pharaoh became angry with both of them, and he sent them to prison. I'm guessing that Pharaoh got sick after eating and drinking. He wasn't sure who did it, so they both went to prison. While in prison, they both had a dream. In the morning after they woke up, they looked sad. They could not figure out what the dream meant. Joseph went up and asked, "What's wrong? Why do you look sad?" See, Joseph could have kept to himself. He didn't have to worry about why someone else was sad. That wouldn't have been a part of his job. He could have minded his own business. I mean, he was in prison. With all his responsibilities, he probably didn't have time to listen to their stories anyway. But Joseph listened to that still small voice, that voice that speaks to us all, that says, "Go." Joseph listened to God. They told Joseph they each had a dream, but there was no interpreter. They were looking for the wise men, the sorcerers, the ones in Egypt that gave interpretations to dreams. But Joseph stopped them in their tracks and said, doesn't interpretations belong to God? Not Ra, not sun God, not Pharaoh, but they belong to the one true God. Joseph gave honor to God and told him who the owner of the interpretation was. Faithfulness means giving God the glory even when you haven't seen your breakthrough. Joseph was faithful. He gave honor to God, not to the gift that God had given him, but to the gift giver. Joseph told him, tell me your dreams. So they both did. The cupbearer was first. He said, in my dream, there was a vine. That vine had 3 branches. Each branch had a bud. Those buds blossomed. Those buds became clusters of grapes. And I took those grapes and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup that I had in my hand. And then I handed it to Pharaoh. Joseph told him that those 3 vines are 3 days. In 3 days, you're going to place Pharaoh's cup back in his hand. You're getting your job back. But remember me when you go back. When you stand beside Pharaoh again, remember me. Tell him about the person who interpreted your dream. Tell him because I was sold into slavery. I did nothing. I'm here because of a false accusation. Let him know because Pharaoh can get me out of my situation. The chief baker, after hearing the interpretation, was excited. He couldn't wait to tell Joseph his dream. He said, I had 3 white baskets, carrying them on my head, and they were full of baked goods. I'm sure he explained there's bread, there was pies, there was cakes. So, but then birds came and they started eating all the bread, all the baked goods. Joseph told him, said, your dream, those 3 baskets are also 3 days. But it's not going to be as good for you because in 3 days, you're going to hang from the tree. In 3 days, those interpretations came through. The baker hung, and the cupbearer was at Pharaoh's side again. In chapter 41, it skips 2 years. It goes from them being released to 2 years. So for 2 years, Joseph waited. He waited for that cupbearer to tell Pharaoh, there's a man who told me what my dream meant, and it was true. He's been falsely accused, Pharaoh. Can you let him out? For 2 whole years. That's on top of everything else that he had waited. Joseph lived for God, not his circumstances. People may forget you, but God never will. For 2 more years, Joseph woke up to prison walls every day. That didn't mean that God wasn't working, because God had a plan. If the cupbearer had told the Pharaoh in the beginning, Joseph would have been released and he would have got to go home. But God knew there was something bigger, something more important that Joseph needed to do. Joseph had to wait for 2 more years for Pharaoh to have his dream, a dream that would change everything. You see, God wasn't preparing Joseph for a prison exit. He was preparing him for a palace entrance. Many times we ask God to get us out of things, but God isn't working on getting us out of things. He's working on placing us where we need to be, someplace better. If you prayed and nothing has changed, God may be preparing you for an entrance instead of an exit. Joseph wasn't forgotten in prison. He was being perfectly positioned for the moment only God could orchestrate. Joseph spent 13 years preparing for that one day when everything would change that would later impact generations. The same God who remembered Joseph remembers you. Join me next time as we watch Joseph go from the prison to Pharaoh's palace in one day and discover what happens when God's timing meets years of faithful preparation. May God bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you and give you peace.